Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for being here today. Before I start, I just need to say that the views expressed today are my own and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco or the Federal Reserve System. Now, with that being said, I'm here today to just give an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program loans that went out to small businesses in Orange County and in the LA metro area. So just to start with a quick overview and reminder of the Paycheck Protection Program. So the original program was passed as part of the CARES Act and was designed as a forgivable loan that went through the Small Business Administration. The first round was authorized at $349 billion and was used up within just a couple of weeks, which as a result, Congress then passed an additional $320 billion extension to the program, and the deadline was extended to August 8th of 2020. Now, the program went through the Small Business Administration, but the loans themselves were originated by traditional lenders, including nonprofit lenders like community development financial institutions and also fintechs, although initially fintechs had to work through partner banks rather than being authorized lenders themselves. The applications were really designed to be, the program was really designed to be for small businesses, which was generally defined as those with less than 500 employees, though there were some important exceptions to businesses in accommodation and food service where they were allowed to have less than 500 employees per site rather than less than 500 employees firm-wide. And the program also included sole proprietorships, independent contractors, and those who are self-employed, so non-employee businesses. Now, in December, Congress passed an additional COVID relief bill as part of in addition to the annual appropriations, and the PPP program was renewed and extended with several important modifications. The extension was for $284 billion. And the new PPP allows for additional brand new applicants to PPP, so those that didn't receive funding in the first round. And those have basically the same eligibility criteria as they did last year. Now, additionally, businesses that are still struggling and received PPP and have expended or intend to expend all of that financing are allowed to apply for what they're calling a second draw from the PPP program. Now, these businesses have to meet a stricter set of eligibility criteria. They have to be smaller, so having less than 300 employees, and they must show a 25% decline in gross receipts relative to similar quarters in 2019. Additionally, the second draw is capped at a much smaller amount of $2 million relative to the $10 million that businesses were eligible for in the first round. Now, all of the data I'm sharing today comes from the SBA's public data release from August of last year. This was data provided at the zip code level for loans that went out. And then in order to get an estimate for how many businesses existed prior to the COVID context, I'm pulling from the census's zip code business pattern data, which comes from 2018. Now, this includes all establishments with less than 500 employees, but unfortunately does not include a count of sole proprietorships, independent contractors, or other non-employee businesses. But that being said, it's the closest I can get to data that matches the SBA eligibility criteria at the zip code level. So to start, I just want to talk about how many loans went out. And in Orange County, it was nearly 68,000 PPP loans went out last year, and more than 85% of those were small loans. And so that's what the SBA called any loan under $150,000. Across the LA metro, that number was around 260,000 total loans, and a slightly larger share were small loans. And again, across California, we saw around 85% small loans and more than 600,000 total loans. Now, when we look at the loans by size, unfortunately, the August SBA release does not allow me to actually compute an average across large and small loans because they treated these loans differently. So here, I'm just going to talk about small loans and large loans independent of each other. When we look at small loans, we can see that these really went to small businesses. So the median loan was for just under $21,000. And this actually corresponds to the maximum amount that sole proprietorships and independent contractors were eligible for. So we have reason to believe then that a lot of these small loans are going to non-employee businesses. And you can see that the average loan was just around $33,000. So again, these loans are really going to small businesses. The most that you could apply for was 2.5 months of payroll. And at $33,000, you can see that's not a huge payroll amount. And then when we look across all of the large loans, although a lot of reporting has gone out and attention has been paid to the really, really big loans that went out, you can see that by total loan volume, the next largest group is actually those just above that small loan threshold. In Orange County, just over 1,300 loans went out that were between $1 million and $10 million. The remainder were smaller loans. And in the LA Metro, the number of $1 to $10 million loans was 4,202. Next, I wanted to focus a little bit on which industries are really accessing PPP loans. And so what I'm showing here is the breakdown of establishments with less than 500 employees in California, and that's in the far right column. That's just to get a sense for how much this sector is present in small businesses around the state. Again, this excludes sole proprietorships, but is the closest data that we have at this level. And what we can see here is that most industries got a share of PPP loans that roughly corresponds with how prevalent they are in the state. But the two exceptions are particularly concerning, given that we know they were particularly hard hit by COVID shutdowns and declines in economic activity. And this is retail, trade, and accommodation and food service. So across the state, retail trade makes up 11.5% of small establishments, but they received just over 8% of PPP loans in Orange County and less than 9% across the state. Meanwhile, accommodation and food service makes up 9.8% of small establishments, but received just 6.6% of loans in Orange County and 7.5% statewide. It's important to acknowledge that both of these sectors are slightly less prevalent in Orange County relative to their state average, but nevertheless, their share of PPP loans is below what we would have expected relative to their share of small employee establishments. Next, I thought it would be helpful to talk about which lenders were really the providers of PPP loans in Orange County. Now you can see that a lot of activity comes from the big national banks, and the top three, in fact, are Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo. This is also true statewide in California. These three were the biggest lenders in California for PPP loans. Several regional banks, including Farmers and Merchant Bank of Long Beach and Union Bank, also played a big role in Orange County. But interestingly, a large share of loans were made by fintechs, seen here with the pink arrows. And now you'll note that all of these actually say bank in them. These Cross River Bank, Customers Bank, Web Bank, and Celtic Bank are all traditional banks, but they served as fintech partners and conduits for the PPP program for fintech firms such as PayPal, Square, and Cabbage. This fintech activity is also particularly interesting in light of reporting on issues that small business owners of color had in applying to PPP loans. So while unfortunately the SBA data was not sufficient to do any sort of racial analysis, and so I'm not able to present on that today, there is some anecdotal evidence from the media and other researchers that is pretty troubling. So reporting from early in the crisis suggested that large banks were prioritizing existing business customers and larger businesses. Advocates then feared that small business owners of color were less likely to have established banking relationships and more likely to run very small businesses, including sole proprietorships. And so as a result, they would have more difficulty accessing PPP at a lot of these large lenders. Additionally, the National Community Reinvestment Coalition conducted a mystery shopper audit of 47 different financial institutions across 60 total branches in the LA region. And they found that Black and Hispanic testers were treated less favorably than white testers in 35% of tests. They also found differences among male and female testers. And so it's particularly interesting to see that we have a lot of activity from online lenders in a context where we're worried about the way that smaller business owners and business owners of color are being treated at traditional banking institutions. Now, finally, I wanted to talk about where within Orange County PPP loans went. And now in this slide, I've split the county into thirds based just on the sheer number of PPP loans. And from this map, we can see that zip codes closer to the coast tended to have higher loan concentrations, though there are also pockets around Anaheim and Tustin with lots of loans. But there's a lot of ways to think about whether or not PPP distribution went to where we thought it needed to go. And so another way to look at this is rather than the sheer count of loans, we can look at it as PPP loans relative to the number of small businesses that we believe are in these zip codes. And that's what I'm showing here on the left slide. Now, left map. As a reminder, my denominator isn't quite perfect. We're excluding sole proprietorships and nonprofits, but that actually suggests then that this is probably a little bit of an overestimate of PPP coverage. Now, we can see already that this blue map looks different than the blue map on the previous slide. Now, we still see strength along the coasts, but there is this chunk right in the middle of the map in the light blue where we see that a smaller share of businesses in this middle part received PPP loans relative to the total count of businesses. That all being said, overall in Orange County, all zip codes saw at least half of their businesses receiving loans. This is higher performance than in many other parts of the states, though LA County also had high PPP utilization. Finally, it's important to consider the distribution of PPP loans in a broader economic context. And so what you can see in the purple map here is the median income of these zip codes, categorized as low and moderate income in the lightest purple. These are areas where the median income is below 80% of the LA Metro's median, to the darkest purple, which are the higher income zip codes. And you can see that Orange County overall is a predominantly higher income area, but that coverage across these high income zip codes really did vary. Now, when we look at the lower income and the moderate income zip codes here, you can see that they actually correspond pretty well with a lot of those light blue areas on the left map. So when we look specifically at just the low and moderate income areas, there's only 11 zip codes in Orange County that are considered lower and moderate income. Now, in the aggregate, a slightly smaller share of businesses received PPP in these neighborhoods relative to high income neighborhoods. But the average zip code did about as well as the average high income zip code, probably due to the fact that we see a lot of variation among high income zip codes. Interestingly, in Orange County, the area with the lowest utilization of PPP loans per number of small businesses appear to be in the middle income zip codes. Those where the income is around between 80 and 120% of the LA Metro median. This is true both in the aggregate, where 66% of businesses received PPP, relative to 69% for low and moderate and 71% for high income zip codes, and also true for the average zip code. Finally, I just want to talk about the new programs that California has recently pushed out to address small business COVID relief. The first announced by the governor's office is the California Rebuilding Fund. Now, this is a loan program really designed around recovery loans. And this is for small businesses that think that they can ride out the remainder of the crisis and are applying for funding in order to sort of kick off once the economy gets a little bit stronger. This program is a public-private partnership. The California iBank is providing anchor funding and additionally access to one of their traditional small business loan guarantee programs. And then this funding is being matched by private funding coming from philanthropy and investment sources. Applications happen through an online portal and then route to local community development financial institutions, which facilitate the origination of the loan itself. Businesses, in order to be eligible, must employ 50 or fewer full-time equivalent employees and have gross revenues of less than $2.5 million in 2019. And the program is designed in a way that the loans are going to be balanced across the state, so we don't see particularly or over heavy concentrations in some of the big metros or in SoCal versus NorCal, et cetera. And then more recently, the governor also announced the Small Business COVID-19 Relief Grant Program. This program is up to $500 million total. The amount per business varies from $5,000 to $25,000, depending on the revenue of the business. These are being allocated not on a first come, first served basis, but rather based on a whole slew of priority criteria established by the state. And the deadline for these is actually, for this round one, is actually just in 2 days on January 13th. With that, I just want to say thank you for your time and I look forward to your questions.